You know that feeling when some people seem born with one foot in heaven and the other on earth? That was Carlo Acutis. From a very young age, he wasn't like other kids his age. While most children were busy with video games and play, he liked those things too. Make no mistake, Carlo had a connection with the divine that even adults seasoned in faith found remarkable. He spoke to God with such naturalness, so effortlessly, it was like chatting with an old childhood friend. And the most incredible part? God answered, not with words you could hear, but through dreams, visions, and that inexplicable peace only someone who has felt the presence of the sacred can recognize. It was as if the boy had a direct line to heaven, a spirituality so genuine that it couldn't fit into the usual rational explanations we use to understand the world. His mother, Antonia Salzano, says that by the age of 3, Carlo was already asking to go to church, to attend Mass, to sit quietly before the tabernacle. At a time when most children can't sit still for 5 minutes, he lingered in contemplation. There was something different about him, something that went beyond the religious upbringing his parents tried to give him. Carlo's dreams weren't simple childish fantasies. They were warnings, messages, and calls to prayer, wrapped in vivid, detailed imagery. Once, he dreamed of the Basilica of Assisi collapsing, the sacred temple, steeped in history, where St. Francis underwent his radical conversion, coming apart piece by piece. Imagine the shock. But Carlo didn't panic like anyone else would. He simply woke up with the certainty that he needed to pray for that place. He told his mother, with a seriousness most children lack, that he had seen the tower fall and that God was asking for prayers. A few days later, an earthquake shook Umbria, and the basilica's tower indeed collapsed, exactly as he had seen in his dream. Coincidence? For those without faith, perhaps. But for those who understand the depth of prayer and connection with Jesus Christ, it's a clear sign that God works through those who make themselves available. Carlo was always available. He didn't shy away from the supernatural, didn't fear the unexplained. On the contrary, he embraced those moments as opportunities to serve, to intercede, to grow closer to the living gospel. His family marveled at the accuracy of the dream, but Carlo simply said, with that disarming calm, "The Lord showed me so I could pray." Plain and simple. No drama, no desire for attention. Just a boy fulfilling his mission. And it didn't stop there. Carlo also had visions that deeply affected his family and how he lived his faith. He saw his own grandfather in purgatory, a place many prefer not to think about but which is part of Christian teaching and Catholic understanding of life after death. And what did the boy do? He offered his own suffering, his small daily pains, his difficulties, all for the soul of his grandfather. By the age of 15, he had a spiritual maturity many adults take decades to reach, if they ever do. He would calmly say, "I want to offer my illness to go straight to heaven." Think about that. How many people do you know who face pain as an offering? Who see suffering not as punishment, but as a chance to grow spiritually and help other souls? That mindset doesn't appear overnight. It comes from a life of deep devotion, constant Bible study, and an intimate relationship with Scripture and the Church. Carlo lived surrounded by signs from heaven, and perhaps the greatest of all was the peace he carried, a peace not of this world, but from the kingdom he longed to reach. His friends at school said it was impossible to see him nervous or stressed. Even in difficult situations, he maintained a serenity that seemed supernatural. And it truly was. What most impressed people about Carlo was his clarity about good and evil. To him, these weren't abstract or philosophical ideas. They were real, concrete forces vying for each soul every day. He spoke about angels and saints with the same ease he spoke about his favorite computer games. Carlo was a tech nerd, a boy of his time, skilled at programming, website creation, and graphic design. But he used all these talents for evangelization. He created a website cataloging every Eucharistic miracle in the world, a monumental project requiring research, dedication, and unwavering faith in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. He also wasn't afraid to talk about the opposing forces, the ones lurking around distracted souls, taking advantage of moments of weakness to plant doubt and draw people away from faith. Yet Carlo never lived in fear of them. Quite the opposite. He knew, with unshakable certainty, that good is infinitely stronger. This conviction wasn't born of childish naivety, but of a real, profound experience with authentic Christianity. He saw spiritual battles all around him, yet he deliberately chose to side with the victor. And what was the secret to that daily choice? The Eucharist. Carlo called communion the highway to heaven, and it wasn't just a pretty phrase. It was the center of his spirituality, the fuel that powered his entire life. Think about it. How often do we go to church on Sunday, attend a service or mass, yet our hearts remain distant? How often are we physically present but mentally elsewhere, thinking about bills, problems, the coming week? Carlo was the opposite of that. When he walked into a church, it was as if the world outside simply ceased to exist. There, before the tabernacle, he truly felt at home. He prayed the rosary every day, not out of obligation, not because anyone told him to, but because he had a personal love for Our Lady of Fatima, whom he affectionately called my best friend. Imagine the depth of that relationship. To him, Mary wasn't a distant figure, a saintly image framed in old paintings. She was maternal, close, alive, walking with him every step of his journey. This kind of devotion isn't learned from prepared sermons or complex theological theories. It's learned in practice, in the silence of adoration, in moments when you're alone with God and realize that, in truth, you've never been alone. Carlo would spend hours in Eucharistic adoration several times a week, simply contemplating, talking, loving. Priests who met him said they had never seen such devotion in a young person. It was rare, precious, so striking that even the oldest clergy questioned their own faith. When Carlo fell ill, everyone expected anger, sadness, the classic question, "Why me, God?" But that's not what happened. He transformed leukemia, a brutal, aggressive disease that robs a person of energy, hair, and physical dignity, into an offering of praise. With a serenity only true faith can bring, he said, "I offer everything for the Pope and the Church." Think about that. At 15, facing death, his body ravaged by illness, he didn't think of himself. He thought of the unity of the body of Christ, the spiritual health of the Catholic community, the collective good of the faithful worldwide. Even while hospitalized, he kept praying the rosary, kept asking to attend Mass when he could, kept smiling at nurses and doctors even when the pain was unbearable. The healthcare professionals who cared for him in his final days said they had never seen anything like it, a 15-year-old facing death with the peace of an ancient saint. After he passed on October 12, 2006, signs began to multiply in ways no one expected. Young Christians in different countries began dreaming of him, always smiling, always at peace, sometimes simply saying, "Do not be afraid." Patients whom doctors had given up on woke up cured, with no medical explanation. People who had abandoned religion, who hadn't set foot in a church for years, returned to faith with spine-tingling testimonies, saying Carlo appeared to them in moments of despair, in dreams, visions, or an unexplainable sense of presence. Among countless reports from around the world, one would gain international attention and change the story of this young saint forever. Campo Grande, Brazil. October 12, 2013, exactly 7 years after Carlo's death, on the feast day of Our Lady of Aparecida, patroness of Brazil and one of Latin America's most beloved Marian devotions. A boy named Mateus was in a desperate situation no parent could bear to imagine. He suffered from a severe pancreatic condition, a congenital malformation that caused constant vomiting, severe dehydration, and alarming weight loss. Imagine the agony of a child who couldn't keep any food or liquid down, wasting away day by day while doctors tried everything without success. And imagine the despair of a mother, watching her son fade before her eyes, feeling powerless, asking God why this was happening to an innocent child. That day, the first Eucharistic Congress of Campo Grande was taking place, gathering hundreds of faithful in prayer, praise, and adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. Mateus's mother, driven by the faith that springs from desperation but also from the deepest hope, the faith that clings to any possibility when medicine has given up, asked for Carlo Acutis' intercession. She had heard of this young Italian boy who died young, devoted to the Eucharist, and something inside her said he could help. She touched her son with a relic of the blessed youth, a small piece of fabric that had touched Carlo's body, one of those relics the Catholic Church keeps with such care and reverence. And at that very moment, the impossible happened. Mateus stopped vomiting. Just like that, suddenly, without warning, without transition. 1 minute he was agonizing, pale, weak. The next, calm, with color in his face, smiling, as if he had never been sick. He never showed symptoms again. The healing was complete, instantaneous, and permanent. The Vatican doesn't take miracles lightly. There's a rigorous, meticulous, almost scientific process to determine whether an event is truly a divine intervention or just a medical coincidence, spontaneous remission, or misdiagnosis. Experts from various fields are consulted. Medical records are reviewed line by line. Witnesses are interviewed under oath. Independent doctors, often skeptical or even atheist, are consulted. In Mateus's case, the process was even more rigorous. Knowing this miracle could be decisive for Carlo's canonization. Every detail of the illness, every blood test, every scan, every symptom documented over the years of suffering was examined. The doctors treating Mateus, experienced gastroenterologists who had tried every possible treatment, were interviewed and could not explain the sudden, complete change. They ran new tests on the boy, monitored his health for years to ensure the healing was permanent and not just a temporary improvement. After years of careful investigation, the verdict was unanimous: a cure inexplicable by science. There was no natural, medical, or rational explanation for what happened to Mateus on that October 12th. It was officially a miracle. The miracle of Campo Grande was recognized by the Vatican, and with it, Carlo Acutis' path to canonization was paved with heavenly gold. But what impressed people most wasn't just the miracle itself. It was the web of connections, the deep meanings, the divine synchronicities surrounding that day. It was as if heaven had orchestrated every detail with surgical precision, like a maestro conducting a cosmic symphony. The local priest, Father Marcelo Tenorio, still moved to tears when telling this story, explained to the faithful that the date could not be a coincidence. It was the same day Carlo died in Monza, Italy, departing for heaven at 6:40 a.m. in 2006. The same day his beatification process officially opened in Milan, when the church formally began investigating his life and virtues. The same day as Our Lady of Aparecida, patroness of Brazil, the dark-skinned virgin found in the waters of the Paraíba do Sul River, who became a symbol of faith for the Brazilian people. For monumental events, all intertwined by a single golden spiritual thread, Our Lady of Aparecida was the main reason for Carlo's canonization. The priest said, tears running down his face. She wanted the miracle to happen here, in Brazil, on her land, to show that this young saint has a special mission for our people. And indeed, over time, something extraordinary and inexplicable began to happen. Brazil, a country across the Atlantic with no obvious geographical or cultural connection to Carlo's Italy, became the beating heart of devotion to him. Over 99% of the miracles attributed to Carlo came from Brazilian soil. Groups of young people at Catholic universities began gathering to study his life. Entire parishes adopted him as the patron of youth. Families placed his image in their homes, praying to him for protection over their teenage children. Everyone began to know and love that Italian boy in a hoodie and sneakers who seemed to have chosen Brazil as his spiritual home, his posthumous mission. The Angel of Youth apostolate was born here, created by young Brazilians inspired by Carlo's story, determined to spread his message of everyday holiness, of the Eucharist at the center of life, of using technology to evangelize. And with this movement, a living current of faith spread across the country like a holy fire, impossible to extinguish, igniting young hearts with the desire to live authentic, radical faith. Prayer groups dedicated to him began to form, social media pages gained millions of followers, documentaries were made, books written, video testimonies recorded of people touched by Carlo's intercession. It was as if, even after death, he was fulfilling the mission he began in life, using every available means to bring people closer to Jesus Christ. And Brazil, with its warm faith, welcoming spirit, and vibrant spirituality, was the perfect soil for this seed to grow and bear abundant fruit. The small church where Mateus's miracle happened was not large, not luxurious, lacking the colorful stained glass of European cathedrals or the Renaissance frescoes of Italian basilicas. It was simple, humble, cozy, the kind of church you find in any Brazilian neighborhood, with wooden pews, images of popular saints, a modest altar full of devotion. Yet it was there, in that seemingly ordinary space, that heaven decided to touch earth in an undeniable, transformative way. Because of that miracle, which changed the lives of Mateus and his family, the place was elevated to the status of the sanctuary of Our Lady of Aparecida and Saint Carlo Acutis, the first sanctuary in the world dedicated to the blessed youth, even before he was officially canonized. An immense privilege, a recognition by the Church that something truly sacred had taken place there, worthy of perpetual veneration. They inscribed the letters HIC in the floor at the entrance, Latin for here, in this place. Here, the impossible happened. Here, a desperate mother found hope when all seemed lost. Here, medicine reached its limits, and faith proved it can go further. Here, faith ceased to be abstract theory, distant doctrine, and became tangible, concrete, verifiable reality. Since then, every year on October 12th, at 6:40 a.m., the exact hour Carlo took his last breath in Italy, saying his final words, "I am happy to die because I lived my life without wasting a single minute." The faithful gather at that sanctuary to pray the rosary. It is a moment of deep, reverent silence, broken only by the soft murmur of prayers rising like fragrant incense and the faint real scent of incense floating in the air, like an invisible yet absolutely real presence. Many who participate in this morning prayer, when the sun is just beginning to rise and the city is still quiet, say they feel something inexplicable and profoundly moving, a peace that calms even the deepest anxiety, even the existential fear that lives in the hearts of so many. A presence you don't see with your physical eyes, but feel with your heart. With that spiritual intuition we all have but often ignore because reason tells us it can't be true. It's as if Carlo is still there, between the wooden pews, smiling quietly in that shy way he had in life, beside Our Lady, his best friend, his heavenly mother, his companion on the spiritual journey. And perhaps he really is, because the doctrine of the communion of saints isn't abstract theory for those who have faith. It's the living certainty that those who die in Christ continue to live in a way far more real, more intense, more complete than when they were bound to a mortal body. Carlo wasn't a perfect saint, the kind you see in medieval stained glass with golden halos and solemn expressions. He played video games, loved Pokemon and Super Mario, had teenage quirks, could be stubborn when he thought he was right, argued with his mother about bedtime. But he was consistent. He lived exactly what he believed. There was no contradiction between his words and his actions, between his professed faith and his daily life. And that's exactly what makes his story so powerful, so relevant, so necessary for our generation. He shows that holiness isn't living in a glass dome, isolated from the world in a medieval monastery, shielded from modern temptations and challenges. Holiness is living in the world, with all its technology, distractions, and temptations, without being corrupted by it. It's choosing good every day, even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one is watching and you could easily do otherwise without apparent consequence. Today, Carlo Acutis is a symbol of an entire generation seeking the divine without leaving the real world behind. He represents young Christians who don't want to pretend to be perfect, who don't want a faith of empty rules and shallow moralism, but want to be authentic, true, transparent with God and others. They aren't afraid of technology, modernity, social change, but they understand, with wisdom beyond their years, that these things only make sense when subordinated to something greater, a transcendent purpose beyond immediate pleasure and superficial satisfaction. Carlo used the internet, social media, programming, but he wasn't a slave to them. He mastered technology, it didn't master him. And in this lies a profound lesson for all of us glued to screens, slaves to notifications, addicted to likes and views. Carlo's greatest miracle isn't recorded in Vatican files with official stamps and bishop signatures. It isn't in hospitals, in Matthias's medical records, or in relics carefully preserved under glass and venerated by the faithful. It's in every ordinary person who rediscovers the beauty of God in the simple, in the everyday, in the silence of Eucharistic adoration. It's in every young person who decides, inspired by him, to be original, to live their own vocation, not a cheap copy of the world's standards that try to mold us all into the same mediocre shape. Because in the end, as Carlo always told his school friends with that quiet but firm smile, everyone is born original, but many die as copies. And that phrase, which he didn't invent but lived fully, is perhaps his greatest legacy for us. Not letting the world turn us into yet another copy of a model that wasn't made for us, that doesn't respect our individuality, our unique vocation, our specific calling from God. Carlo Acutis' story teaches something the modern world seems to have completely forgotten. True happiness isn't in likes, it isn't in follower counts, it isn't in looking perfect on social media while empty and lost inside. Carlo had an account on Orkut, the most popular social network at the time, but he didn't live for it. He knew it was just a tool, a means, never an end in itself. How many of us today can say the same? How many can go a single day without compulsively checking our phones, without feeling that anxiety to see if someone commented, liked, or validated us? Carlo found his validation elsewhere, before the tabernacle, in silent moments with God, in the deep certainty that he was loved no matter what. And that certainty, that inner peace, radiated from him so powerfully that people noticed it even without a word. His teachers said he had a different presence in the classroom. He wasn't conventionally popular, not the class leader everyone blindly followed, but he had moral authority, a consistency of life that earned respect even from the most rebellious classmates. When someone made a cruel joke about another student, Carlo didn't laugh. When gossip spread in the hallways, he didn't join in. And the most remarkable thing, he did all this without being annoying, moralistic, or preaching. He simply lived by his principles, and that alone was a powerful witness. There were boys at school who mocked faith, made fun of religion, but when they saw Carlo praying quietly before meals in the cafeteria, something inside them fell silent. It was impossible to mock a faith so genuine, so lived, so real. And some of those boys, years after his death, confessed that those simple scenes, Carlo praying discreetly, helping a struggling classmate, smiling even when provoked, had planted seeds of faith that only sprouted long afterward. By the way, if you want to learn how to keep your faith alive in the modern world using the practical teachings of Carlo Acutis, I've prepared a complete, special guide available in the first pinned comment below. Don't miss it. There you'll find concrete strategies Carlo used in his daily life that you can apply immediately. Go to the first pinned comment, save the content, and use it as your guide. Carlo's relationship with technology deserves special attention, especially in an age when so many young people are completely enslaved by electronic devices. He taught himself programming, created complex websites, understood graphic design, and was fascinated by computers and the internet, which was just beginning to expand. But he set a strict rule for himself: No more than 1 hour of video games per week. 1 hour a week. At a time when most teens spent hours every day glued to their consoles, Carlo limited his time because he knew that, fun as it was, it couldn't become the center of his life. He used the time he saved to do things that really mattered, visiting the elderly in nursing homes, bringing food to the homeless, helping his mother with household chores, and above all, spending time in prayer. He used to say video games were like spices in food. In small amounts they enhance the flavor. In excess, they ruin everything. What wisdom for a 15-year-old, and how sharply this contrasts with how we live today, where digital entertainment isn't the spice anymore. It's become the main course, leaving us spiritually malnourished. Carlo's most ambitious project was cataloging Eucharistic miracles. He researched, with almost scientific rigor, hundreds of cases worldwide where consecrated hosts physically transformed into human heart tissue, where chalices of consecrated wine became real blood, where particles of communion remained incorrupt for centuries. He didn't accept reports without verification, didn't include doubtful stories just because they were appealing. He investigated the sources, read official church documents, studied medical reports when available. He created a website and a traveling exhibition with photos, maps, and detailed explanations of each miracle. This exhibition now travels worldwide, has been seen by millions, and continues to convert hearts in ways he likely never imagined while working on it in his bedroom in Milan. How many young people, adults, skeptics even, looked at those photos of hosts transformed into heart tissue, read the medical reports from scientists with no religious interest, and felt faith blossom or reignite inside them? Impossible to count, but surely thousands, maybe millions. And it all began with a teenager who believed the Eucharist wasn't a symbol, wasn't a metaphor, but the real presence of Christ. Carlo's devotion to Our Lady of Fatima was deep and very personal. He had a special affection for that particular apparition, for the 3 shepherd children in Portugal who saw the Virgin Mary, because he saw in them what he himself lived: simplicity, purity, the ability to see the sacred in the midst of everyday life. He prayed the rosary every day, without fail, even when tired, even with school exams, even on days he felt sick from leukemia. He always carried a simple plastic rosary in his pocket. And when people asked why he prayed so much, why a boy his age devoted so much time to prayer when he could be having fun, he answered with disarming simplicity, "The Virgin Mary is my mother and my best friend. Why wouldn't I talk to her every day?" That answer, so obvious to him, left people speechless. It revealed something we all know deep down but often ignore. Building a friendship with God and the saints requires time, presence, that daily investment we naturally give to people we love here on earth. When Carlo was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, one of the most aggressive forms of blood cancer, the doctors were blunt with the family. Chances were small, treatment would be brutal, and even if it worked, it would take years and leave serious consequences. Carlo's mother, Antonia, says she fell into despair, as any mother would. But Carlo, the very boy receiving the sentence of death, comforted her. "Mom, don't cry. This may be my passage to heaven." At 15, facing death, he was not afraid. He had peace, because he had spent his whole life preparing for that moment, even without knowing it. Every communion he received, every rosary he prayed, every act of charity he performed, all of it was building in him an unshakable trust in God. During his hospital stay, between chemotherapy sessions that left him exhausted and nauseated, Carlo continued asking to receive communion whenever possible. The hospital chaplains were amazed by this boy who seemed more concerned with spiritual health than physical. He offered every injection, every painful test, every sleepless night to the church and the Pope. He wanted his suffering to serve a purpose, not to be wasted. And how many of us, when dealing with a simple cold, complain and rebel against God? Carlo's final days were marked by a quiet heroism few can reach. The pain was intense, the medication no longer effective, his body failing. Yet he kept smiling, joked with nurses, asked how they were, genuinely cared about the lives of those caring for him. One nurse confessed years later that it was Carlo's witness that brought her back to the church after 20 years away. She said, "I couldn't understand how such a young boy, dying in such pain, could have so much peace. That wasn't normal. It had to be God." And she was right. It wasn't normal. It was supernatural. It was God's grace visibly at work in a life transparent enough for divine light to shine through. When Carlo passed on the morning of October 12, 2006, something happened that the family only understood later. At that exact moment, in different parts of the world, people who had known Carlo or just heard of him felt something. A sudden peace, a certainty that he was well. Some even thought they heard his voice saying, "I'm in heaven." These were signs appearing even before the official miracles, before the beatification process, before any formal recognition by the church. Carlo's body, initially buried in a regular cemetery, now rests in a sanctuary in Assisi, the city of St. Francis, the saint he loved and resembled so much in simplicity and radical love for Christ. His body is incorrupt, or at least preserved in a way that scientists cannot fully explain by normal conservation methods. Thousands of pilgrims visit every year from all continents, all ages, but it's the young who are most striking. Teenagers, college students, people in their 20s, kneeling before his body and crying. They cry because they see someone who was like them, who faced the same temptations, doubts, pressures, but chose a different path. And that path, they realize, was not one of sadness or repression, but of genuine joy and true freedom. Carlo was happy, deeply, authentically happy. And that happiness didn't depend on external circumstances, health or sickness, success or failure. It depended only on his union with Christ, that living friendship with God he nurtured every day. How many of us can say the same? How many have a happiness that survives storms, illness, disappointments, losses?